I will also be giving out hugs after today. I'm super excited to be here. Can I just say, I miss live events. I know we've been back at live events for the last year or so, but I really miss live events, and I actually missed a lot of you. There's so many amazing friends and former team members here that have gone on to become amazing leaders in their own right. So I say, give yourselves a round of applause. This is awesome to bring everyone back together. If I can say, I'm proud of us, in this community. This is a really great community. So thank you for coming out. What I want to do today was talk about some of the themes that I've picked up on over the last few years as we've been selling in these times of adversity. Unless you were selling back in 2008 or at the turn of the dot-com boom, you have not seen this before. And if you're a rep, you haven't seen this kind of adversity, interest rates and inflation, layoffs, all that kind of stuff. And if you're a leader, you've also probably have not dealt with the kind of uncertainty that you're seeing in today's market. So I didn't want to make this a talk just about leadership, although there'll be some leadership-y elements in it. I want to make it about the top things that I see going on in the market, and certainly we'll have the leadership panel up there later on, and we'll dive more into this kind of stuff. But I just want to say that the last time that I was at Sales TO, or it was supposed to be at Sales TO, so gratefully I've been invited a few times to speak at Sales TO, was supposed to be, and I remember the date, April 27th, 2020. It was to coincide with the launch of Sell the Way You Buy. And of course, that meeting didn't happen. It was supposed to be a whole shebang like this, community event, didn't happen. But don't worry, because I celebrated just like you did at home with my family. So this is the shot from 2020. My girls, they were very excited, and they made me a cake. You can see here, book-themed cake. And they made me this awesome novelty card with all these beautiful messages in it that I still store, in my office and look at all the time. So I'm super grateful and super proud. They gave me an amazing book launch, and who would have thought the stuff that we talked about in the book couldn't have been more timely for what was going on at the time. And certainly, 4 years later, so they were upset, my kids, that they didn't get to have a proper book launch with me, so they made me write another book 4 years later. But, I've learned a couple things. Certainly, the world of selling and leadership has changed. And also, I have gone from living with a bunch of girls to a bunch of women now in my house. And you may have seen them. They are manning the book booth with my wife. So if you want to, they've never seen Daddy do his thing. So this is exciting for them. So hi, girls. Good to see you here. Yeah. So a lot has changed in the last little while, and I want to tackle some of these three key macro themes that have been going on in the market. And it's interesting, I've had this discussion with so many people. The deeper I get into this, the Sell the Way You Buy and that leadership book, and just life in general, I found there's these common threads that weave in between how we execute, how we lead teams. So some of these things you'll see have some common threads to them. The first thing, though, I want to talk about is probably the biggest thing that I see being a challenge for reps and leaders in the market, which is you're trying to sell stuff, and the number one question is, how do I create a sense of urgency in the mind of the buyer? If only they would be motivated to buy this thing, life would be good. So how do we do that? And this speaks to a big problem. In sales, there are a lot of terms that we sometimes confuse with one another. For example, I often talk about value and ROI being two completely different things that sales leaders and reps, we confuse all the time. And as it relates to priority, let me kind of spell this out a little bit. When times are tough and companies don't have a lot of money to spend, budgets are tight, recession fears, all these kinds of things, the sense is that people will only buy things if there's a very strong business case. Put together a strong business case, that's how we're going to get to the top, we're going to ignore everything else. In fact, one of my clients, if you're familiar with the MEDDIC or MEDPIC or any of these methodologies, right? This is actually a slide I borrowed from an engagement I did with one of my clients. So MEDPIC, this is a multi-billion-dollar software company. And they said, hey, David, we focus on this MEDPIC methodology for discovery and sales execution and so on. And they refer to M1, the metrics, the financial impact of our solution. They're that's our North Star. They call it their North Star. So every deal has to have that quantifiable impact. We need to make sure we're showing that to the buyers and leading with that. And they come to me and I ask them, so you're doing this? And they're oh yeah, M1 business cases all day long. And then I ask them, so how's your win rate doing? Are you selling more stuff? Are you winning more deals? And they say like, no. So what's really interesting about like this North Star, this business case, like we need this financial justification, is this. A good business case is no longer enough. And I would put to you that a good business case was never enough, and it was only obfuscated by the fact that a few years ago people had more money to spend, right? You know, sometimes when times are good, it overshadows some of the things that we could be doing better in our sales motion. So I say like a good business case is no longer enough. If it was, right, then everyone would be winning. And everyone says the same thing. Oh, like we'll help you reduce this and expand that and grow this. And to our customers, we all just sound the same, right? Like if you don't have a good business case, like why are you even talking to customers? But this is the confusion. There's a difference between the concept of importance and priority. So I talked about value and ROI being two different things. This is the differentiation that we have to understand. So importance speaks to the relative magnitude of the size of the problem the customer is looking to solve. Is it a $5,000 problem? Is it $10,000? Is it $1 million problem? How big is this problem? And this is where, when we talk about business case, that's typically where we focus on. But priority is something completely different. Priority speaks to the sense of urgency for the customer to solve that problem. And we remain dumbfounded oftentimes. We pull together this amazing business case and we're like, oh, the customer said no. I don't understand, right? So for example, for you, if I said, is your health and the health of your family, is that the most important thing for you? And yeah, we would all generally agree that's the case. Yeah, like that. Now look, so if we agree that our health and the health of our family is the most important thing in life, does that mean that if I followed you around and I wrote down everything that you ate and all the exercise you got, and did you sleep and eat, you drink your 5 glasses of water, whatever it is, would I see that's consistent with what you said is important to you? Right? I think we know what the answer to that question is. But if I said, okay, hey, look, I know your health is the most important thing for you. You haven't been focusing on it. But here's the thing. I have your medical records here. And the medical records tell me that in the next few months, if you don't get on the treadmill, you're going to have a heart attack. All of a sudden, something that was important became a priority. And so what's the difference? So many of us are going out there and focusing on the ROI of our solution. Right, we pitch solutions and benefits and these kinds of things, when really the thing that's going to be motivating the customer to buy something is not your solution or even its benefits. It's the problem they're looking to solve. So that's the first step. We need to condition ourselves to solve the problem and to infuse our reps with intimate knowledge of the problem the customer is looking to solve if we want to get them to move faster. A good business case is no longer enough, and it never was. But here's the thing with the problem, okay? I'll take you back to David in my younger years, a younger man, a kid on the way, you know, no kid to speak of at the moment, starter home, lots of stuff that needed fixing, electrical, plumbing, painting. And I'm looking at all these projects, and I'm thinking to myself, I could do that. It's just painting. How hard could it be? Little electrical, flip the switch, little plumbing. I was an engineer by education. Like, I can do that, right? And so what's also happening is in a world where your customers don't have a lot of money to spend, right? And budgets are tight, and you know they have all this software sitting around. A lot of you who are selling software, customers are trading licenses. They think to themselves, hey, you know what? I believe you, David. I have this problem, and it's a priority, and I want to solve it. But you know what? I can solve it myself. We have smart people. We have some software in place. You know, we were talking earlier about in the cybersecurity space. It's like, oh, look, you got all these intrusions and things that are going on, but like, it's not like I got, nothing. It's not like, baling twine that's holding the network together. We got software. We got smart people. They'll figure it out, right? And so what's happening now is you're seeing a lot more of this. I recognize the problem, but I'm going to solve it myself or solve it some other way. And so now what you have to do is you have to sell the customer, not just on the problem, but why they cannot solve that problem on their own. I call this the problem with the problem, or the problem loop, right? And so, again, I don't need to just convince you have the problem. I need to sell you on why you cannot solve that problem on your own and why it's harder to solve than you think. There's actually a I'm a big fan of the science. It's a psychological principle known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which tells us that the skills that we need in order to be good at something, like solving a problem, are the same skills that we need in order to know that we're not good at solving that problem. That's why when you watch like sports on TV, maybe it's like a sport that you did at a decent level, and you watch these people do it on TV and you think to yourself, I could do that, right? But you can't, right? You know you can't, but your brain doesn't know what it takes to be an elite athlete at that level, and so it tricks you into thinking you can do it yourselves. So that's why we need to sell people. If you want to sell over the last couple of years and budgets are tight, we need to convince customers like A, the problem that they're trying to solve, and why they can't solve it on their own. I do this like weird Ricky Bobby thing where I just kind of put my hands up and I don't really know what to do after I make a point. Are we good so far on this? You're hanging with me? Okay, good. All right. So that's point number one. Point number two is I want to talk about this concept of coaching, because one of the questions that I start out by asking in the Sales Leader They Need, the new book, is I say, I want you to think about the best sales leader you ever had. Like, think about who's the best sales leader you ever had. People can usually picture this person pretty quickly. And then I want you to answer the question, what was it about this person that made them the best? You don't have to, in your head, what was it about them that made them the best? So I've done this exercise hundreds of times with tons of leaders, so I know what the answer is, right? And I talk about this in the book. And I go to the whiteboard and I write down everything they say. And everything they say, it's probably in your head, falls into two main categories. Number one, they cared about me. Number two, they helped me grow, personally, professionally. And one of the most important parts of that growth, and we're going to talk about some of the other parts later on with the panel, is this idea of coaching, right? Helping people get better at their job. In fact, there's a ton of data that points to the fact that coaching, I talk about this in the book, that coaching is the number one thing as a leader you can do to help your team. Interestingly enough, I was having this conversation with someone today. If you look in Sell the Way You Buy, chapter 6, which is all about discovery, is 20,000 words. It's twice as big as any other chapter. And I remember having this discussion with my publisher. They said, you got this big honking chapter in this book. I'm like, do you want me to break it up or something like that? And they said, well, you talk about discovery. Is discovery the most important part of the sales process? And I said, well, yes, it is. And they said, okay, well, you can keep it, 20,000 word chapter. In the Sales Leader They Need, the biggest chapter has to do with coaching for the same reason. It's like the number one thing that we can do to improve the performance of our team. Top performing reps get a lot of it. They get it weekly. It's tailored to the thing they need. And you see here, companies that provide it have greater annual revenue growth. It's the number one thing. If you're trying to tick the box on all the metrics you can do, and it ticks the box on the best sales leader you ever had was the one that helped me grow and scale. And you'd think that with all of this data pointing to the fact that this is the most important thing we could do, leaders would be like running for the hills to do this thing. As Kyle will say, they are not, right? They are not running for the hills to do this thing. It's actually quite surprising. And I'll tell you, this is something I wouldn't have seen. I've only noticed this really in the last, let's say, year or so. As times get tough, no one's getting quota relief, right? Like we're trying to do more with less, the whole thing. People are trying really hard to hit their quota. And I see a lot of reps and leaders just going back to their desk, gripping the steering wheel tighter, trying to hang on for dear life and do more of the shit that wasn't working to help hit their quota. So they cancel their coaching meetings. People don't show up to training. They're just like, no, I just want to make more prospecting calls, like more effort, right? But more of the wrong effort will not lead to the results. So I see a lot of this, and I see a lot of it as it relates to coaching. It's really interesting. I love, combing Harvard Business every now and then, and this is an article I've been sharing for years. It's about focus and controlling your life. But this particular article talked about the prioritization of coaching. The author says, hey, look, I believe in the power of coaching and mentoring and doing all these things that I can to support them. But then, I get distracted, right? There's fires to put out, there's Slack notifications. And the thing that I said, it's kind of funny that this is point number 2 because we talk about importance versus priority. I would agree, coaching my team is really important. Then let me do a little time audit of actually where I'm spending my time. And I spend a lot of my time doing bullshit things like putting out fires I end up losing the face-off for the coaching sessions with my team, meaning they're on the calendar, but then, oh shit, customer meeting gets scheduled. Like, okay, we got to do that because revenue is the most important thing. And then it just kind of falls by the wayside. It doesn't happen as often as we want. And then it's like, oh, sorry, I didn't spend enough time in the gym or with my family, and now I have this, bad situation to deal with, right? So it's kind of a funny thing that, the problem is actually really easy to solve. It just has to do with a little bit of prioritization. But the other problem is that we actually end up training our teams to not value the coaching we get from us because we deprioritize it. I love this study from Bain, super smart people, okay? They did this survey of sales leaders in the US and the UK, and only 46% of them would be willing to pay at least $1 for their manager, an hour of their manager's time. It's like, when we get together, it's a lot of inspection. It's a lot of, when's this deal closing? Take me through the forecast. It's not a lot of caring. It's not a lot of personal attention. And you can imagine, think about all of the stuff that has happened over the last few years with the layoffs and all the uncertainty. And we get together and we don't even kind of, treat people with the humanity oftentimes that they deserve. It's just all down to business. And we train them to not value this stuff, right? We end up as leaders spreading ourselves too thin, and we train them that it's not valuable. And so one of the things I want to leave you with as you're thinking about this, and Kyle's going to get up, he's going to talk a little bit more about coaching, and there's a lot more in the book, but this is just a really simple principle I talk to a lot of people about, is this what I refer to kind of like the bumping hierarchy. So if you think about how you allocate your time, right, across different dimensions, yourself, your family, your customers, your team members, and so on, there's a hierarchy. So for example, let's say I was doing this, okay, and my family wasn't here, and all of a sudden I get a call saying, oh, one of them is in trouble, they had an accident. I would politely excuse myself and go deal with that because family is higher on the list than you. It just is, right? That's the hierarchy. But it gets a little murky when we get into this discussion at work. What's the hierarchy? So if I have a one-on-one with Paul, but then, Kyle, who's the customer, says, oh, we need to have a meeting. At that time slot, my first inclination is, okay, Paul, can we reschedule our meeting? And then Paul's like, oh, all right, whatever. What else is new, right? So I don't protect that time. We often don't push back on our customers. So a lot of times the challenge is we don't have a hierarchy. Well, what happens if I'm being called into a departmental meeting or a steering committee or something? Who wins the face-off for that? We have to protect the time we have with our team member. This is not the aspirational thing that you should do. I'm just saying be mindful of what the hierarchy looks like for you. But to prioritize the time that you have with your team members, because that is what the data says, again, is the most important thing in terms of driving the growth of your business, but then also creating that affinity, unlocking that discretionary effort that you get from your team. They will try harder for you because you put in the time. Right? So, Ricky Bobby thing again, coaching. Okay, good. You're hanging with me so far? Okay, good. All right. Thank you in the back for the thumbs up. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, number 3, and this has been a perennial issue. I love talking about this because it's a thing, it just doesn't go away. This concept of conviction. And, conviction when it comes to sales is the most intoxicating feeling you can convey to a customer. If I were to tell you, can you tell that I love doing this? You can tell, right? And you're probably not dissecting that emotion, but if I said, how can you tell? You'd be like, oh, well, you're very, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would probably say nice things. Thank you very much, right? You can tell because I have conviction around what I do. And what's really interesting, this was a problem that existed pre-pandemic, but it's certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic, which is the majority of selling to our customers feels almost like an imbalanced relationship. So if we're in sales here, raise your hand if you have ever done the job of the person, the customer you are calling on. Sod, Quentin, all right. A couple, right? So most of us are calling on people whose job we've never done. And oftentimes, it's not just someone, whose job we've never done, it's we're young. The average age of a seller is decreasing. And what you've seen now in the pandemic and post-pandemic, layoffs and so on, is you have a lot of turnover. There's a lot of reps and a lot of leaders here who have been at their companies for a very small amount of time. Some I spoke to today, but day one, at least, day one, right? Others, 2 weeks at the company, right? And so the question, it becomes very difficult to like manifest that confidence and conviction when you're just brand new and you don't know the lingo, and your company is feeding you products and solutions and benefits, which is mostly what enablement tends to focus on. It's like if our customers or our reps, if they only know what's new in version 3.0, it's going to blow their mind and they're going to buy stuff. And you know the answer to that. They will not. They will not. It's not enough. That's not what people are buying, right? They're buying the problems. And I saw this back at Salesforce a ton, so when I worked with my friend Paul here. So, in the small business segment, we had a lot of young, enthusiastic reps, often they were BDRs and they got promoted. And I always remember, so Paul and I, we were both part of the East team at Salesforce, and we had teams in New York. So we'd see each other in New York every now and then. And my New York City sales reps always hustled the most calls, the most emails out of any office. But I would often see reps. It's true. That's what the data said. Sorry. Yeah, it's like there's a little chapter in my book it's called Letting Data Do the Hard Work. It's like, it's not me. It's like, blame the data. So they would always make all these calls, right? But oftentimes there would be reps with like tons of activity and no pipeline. And I would have to listen to these calls and not even like listen for the words. I'm just like listening to hear what I can hear. And you know what they sound like? And I'm glad my kids are here to hear this. I'm like, you sound like one of my kids when they're about to hit me up for something that they think I'm going to say no to already. That's the way you sound when you're talking to the customer. And they can feel it, and it's very off-putting. So you have to stamp that out. Oh, I even had a slide for this. You have to stamp that out of your sales motion. And it's funny, 5 years ago, I ended up writing this article for Harvard Business. This came out in April of 2019. I talk about this in Sell the Way You Buy. I called it experience asymmetry. I gave a name for this imbalance that gets created when we're calling on more experienced buyers whose job we've never done. But I realized it's not just young. I could be super experienced and brand new to my company, and I don't have the stories, and I don't have the lingo. And we arm the reps to basically go out with like products and services, and they get like slapped in the face every time they do. No, and we don't give them coaching. No wonder they're not able to operate with conviction. They need that conviction, especially now. So the take-home message here, and this is just like a simple exercise for you, is I say, when you're going into your first calls with your customers, see if you can get at least 75% of the way through that conversation without even talking about what it is that you do. It doesn't matter where you're headquartered, what your revenues are, like how many offices you got. Spend the majority of that time talking about the customer's problems, the problems you see in the industry, why those problems are so hard to solve, and why customers like them cannot solve them on their own. You will see the engagement of your prospects and customers magically transform. But I'll tell you, this is actually hard to do, and I hate to say, the more big and more enterprise-focused your company is, like these multi-billion-dollar companies, it's actually really hard to make this transition because you're just focused on products and services all day long, and you're fed all sorts of messages from product marketing around what you should be saying. But I would implore you to just try this, right? Focus on the problems. It will help you manifest more conviction as well, because talking about problems is a lot easier than memorizing all the features and functions of your solution, right? I'm not saying don't know your solution, but be really good at talking about those problems, because also that's what the customers care about. They don't give a shit about you, no offense, or your products, or you making your quota. They only care about their problems. So speak about that. And sometimes I'll actually have this conversation when I'm talking to my clients. I will get through a whole chunk of the conversation. I'll say, did you realize we have not once spoken about what I do yet? This is the stuff that your reps need to do, right? And the customers end up being hyper engaged. I'm doing it again. You're all good with me? Hanging with me? You're paying attention. I love it so far. Awesome. All right. So that's really it. I wanted to just say, I'm excited to hear our speakers and our panel today. This is an opportunity, like I said, to get together and have this conversation, which we don't have often enough. So thank you to Relay and TechTO for bringing this back. I give out lots of stuff for free on my website, Cerebral Selling, lots of guides, lots of resources. And, we have the books here today, but I just want to throw this up in case you wanted to get the audiobook of Sell the Way You Buy and you want to listen to 6.5 hours of me reading my own book, you're more than welcome to grab it. Or if you want the Kindle version of The Sales Leader They Need, you can just scan those. Or if you love Amazon for whatever reason. But if you want them, you can get them here for a few bucks off, which you can get them on Amazon. So thank you, and be good, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here.
Awesome.